Party has moved to the left. I love that we are the party of the woke. I believe that we also have to be the party of the still waking.
Former two-term Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick made a last-minute entry in the 2020 race today. He announced his campaign in a video this morning before heading over to New Hampshire to file the paperwork for the first-in-the-nation primary. This brings, for those playing our home game, the Democratic field back up to 18 on your bingo card while we wait to see if former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg ultimately gets on board. Still with us tonight are Jason Johnson and Rick Wilson. Jason, Deval Patrick, born in South Chicago, mostly raised by a single mom, scholarship kid to an East Coast prep school, Harvard Law. Some corporate law, Justice Department Civil Rights Division, two-term governor of Massachusetts. Now, however, he is at a company we associate with one Mitt Romney called Bain Capital. Before you answer, he was asked about Bain Capital. Let's run his answer, and we'll talk about best campaign practices with our friend Jason.
There is a place for private equity in the private economy. There is a place for business in our lives. But it is also true that capitalism generally has a lot to answer for. That is so. And we need to be able to confront that, and that's exactly the work I've been doing at Bain Capital.
Handicap his entry, just hours old so far, if you will.
This is the worst Barack Obama Mitt Romney remix that he could ever release on his debut day. I mean, you know, the Bain Capital, but the South Side of Chicago. You can't say that this is the party of the woke and then start talking about how you worked in this private equity firm. These things don't make sense. But those aren't the only mistakes that he's made. He doesn't have a message. He doesn't have a lane. He appears to be coming in at the same time that a lot of the activists in the Democratic Party believe that billionaires and millionaires are worried about Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, so he looks like he's coming in to sort of be a spoiler for them. He didn't even buy the proper domain name for his campaign website, so it got bought by one of his political enemies in Boston, who's now putting up posts and stories that insult him. And then there are scandals about his foreclosure, his behavior with his ex-brother-in-law. This is the worst rollout ever. I don't know what he's thinking, and I don't know that he's going to be able to make that much of a difference, let alone get into the debate by December.
Wow. Rick Wilson, a lot to react to there. First of all, the question to you is, does his entry into the race presuppose a Biden collapse?
I think what it actually does is probably helps Biden a bit in New Hampshire, because he's the local, another local or regional candidate. So he ends up diluting, I think, Bernie and Warren a little bit in New Hampshire, and maybe gives Biden a chance to, so if Biden loses New Hampshire, as most people anticipate, it's not going to be as bad. It'll be sort of a diluted loss. But I think Jason's right on point. This rollout was, I mean, did they just decide over the weekend? Did they get lit up at a poker game and decide, hey, well, let's run for president for a prank? This was not well done. And at this point, you've got to have your business together if you're going to get in the race this late, or you better have a lot of zeros in your bank account like Mike Bloomberg does. This was not a successful day for him. I don't think he survives very long in this contest.
Well, Jason, since Bloomberg's name was just invoked, what lane, we're talking about Deval's lane, what lane does Mike Bloomberg see for himself, especially since he's saying, I'll see you all after the first couple of primaries?
Yeah, I think Mike Bloomberg, it's that same sort of coffee clutch primary of I'm sitting around with my wealthy friends and we don't like who we see on television, and they're all saying, I bet you I could do that. That's what happened with Howard Schultz, and see how successful he's been. Yeah. This is the problem. You can't be the former governor. You can't be the former champion of stop and frisk and then say that the first primary you're going to get into is Alabama, where a large portion of the primary voters are going to be African American. I don't know what he's thinking. He's probably wasting his money just like Tom Steyer. But what it speaks to is this: the difference between what sometimes the Democratic elites think and how the voters are behaving. Because satisfaction with the Democratic field is actually very high amongst voters. But it seems like the elite donors are somehow dissatisfied with it. And that's a disconnect that I think both of these candidates, in jumping into the race now, are demonstrating they don't understand.
That's right. Rick Wilson, that is true. I have heard some Democrats who are not at all happy to see Bloomberg's name in this race say, imagine what his money could buy. Imagine how his money could change the fate and fortune of the Democratic Party, because here's a guy who, like it or not, has changed life in America incrementally. Public smoking bans, he is largely credited with starting that in New York.
Mm-hmm. Look, if Michael Bloomberg, a guy who's worth roughly $60 billion, is dedicated to removing Donald Trump from office, he will stop this foolish idea of running for president. He will put $1 billion into voter registration in Florida, Ohio, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Minnesota. He will go up on the air in those in the states hurt by the trade war with ads that talk about how Donald Trump's promises were broken to the folks, the farmers and manufacturers in those states, and nuke him until he glows. He will go out there and he will do digital stuff. He will go out and do a data science program for the Democratic candidate. He will go out there and raise money from other people. That's what he wants. If you want to get rid of Trump, that's how to do it if you're a billionaire right now. Not having a vanity project that's going to buy a few guys extra Ferraris or beach houses, but rather something that actually has a meaningful political impact.
So, Jason, if you listen to the Republicans, the Democrats are coming for your guns. They're certainly coming for your money. Bloomberg's coming for any large sugary drinks in your house. What is going on right now, in your view, inside the Democratic Party?
What's happening in the Democratic Party is this sort of fear that they always have that maybe we've gone too far. And they don't seem to want to listen to what the public is actually saying. Look, even Deval Patrick, when he says, look, this is the party of the woke, 40% of the Democratic primary voters obviously want progressive change because they want Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren. That seems to be where the country is going. I don't think Democrats understand that they actually won the popular vote last time, that any Democrat, they could run a cheese sandwich. They've got a 3 million vote lead. All you have to do is run and be a candidate of conviction. But rather than trying to play the middle, which is what's sometimes happening with Biden, which is what's happening with Patrick, which is what's happening with Bloomberg, you have people who don't want to realize that the country wants change. Donald Trump was changed. The Democrats need to have a change candidate, not someone who's going to run down the middle and try and make people feel comfortable. It's not what this country wants anymore.
Rick Wilson, last question. When you and I have talked, you have a very kind of morose theory about how much of the election and the electorate, state by state, is already baked in your view.
Look, there are 35 states in this country where, God love them, but the election is already decided. We know how Alabama is going to vote in the general election. We know how California is going to vote in the general election. Those 35 states are done. The swing states that we're going to fight this thing out in, between 6 and 15, in the broadest sense, those states are much more complicated than most people give them credit for, but they are not hard to the left. Minnesota is probably one of the most blue of all the swing states, but they're not like Oregon or Massachusetts. Wisconsin and Michigan, they have a lot of blue areas, but they are not super woke. Florida, God knows, I mean, it's everything north of I-4 is basically, like, we look at Alabama as being too liberal. And so these states are complicated. These guys cannot go in here with this, national message that works great in California and hope to win in these swing states. I mean, Georgia's on the line for the Democrats. They could pick Georgia up this year, but they're not going to pick it up by saying things like, we're taking away all your private health insurance, which I know Republican pollsters right now are dancing in the streets because that message scares the hell out of people who would otherwise probably vote Democratic in this election cycle.
Two friends of this broadcast who really know what they're talking about, named Jason Johnson and Rick Wilson. Gentlemen, thank you both. And coming up for us, we